People say, where are you from? I say, Stone Harbor. You know, he said, I don't see any black people over there. I said, well, because you're not looking for them. Simple as that.
Yes, there was a strong black community living in Stone Harbor for nearly 100 years. The miracle in our title was that a small group of African American families founded a flourishing community in a mostly white town at a time in our history when racism and segregation were on the rise. Aided by the tolerance of many in the town and by a small integrated school, this group of families helped build the town, and in the process, they built a community that is worth remembering and celebrating. Celebration is what this documentary is about. But it wasn't easy. Survey photos taken by the U.S. military give us a distant overview of the growth of the 81st Street community. In the early years, there was a plan for the development north of 83rd Street, but the streets were never laid out, as we can see that 81st Street is barely a dirt road in 1920, and 82nd Street doesn't even exist. Land all over Stone Harbor was cheap, but especially so north of 83rd Street. By 1926, the streets are more defined, and we can see the church and Aunt Jane Talaferro's working man's cottage, as well as the Robersons' large house on 3rd Avenue. Who were these people, and where did they come from? Lured by steady work, they found that they liked the air and the isolation of the new town. So they brought their wives and children to this new place, this safe harbor, where prejudice was not ingrained.
And then Hun was living in Philadelphia, working in private family, coming to Stone Harbor in the summer. So one summer when she came to Stone Harbor with her private family people, and they got ready to go back to Philadelphia for winter, she decided that she wasn't going to go back. And she found a house in Stone Harbor and rented the house, and that's how she got work in Stone Harbor. And she raised my aunt and my father with her in Stone Harbor, and that's how they grew up in Stone Harbor. There weren't that many colored people there. We called them colored back that time. They weren't black. And they all lived in the area of 81st, 82nd Street, that area. And he met my mother, and they started seeing one another. And eventually they got married there in Stone Harbor. And there were several families. There were the Wrights, the Johnsons, the McCargos, the Andersons, the Robersons, and later on the Smiths.
His mother's sister ran a boarding house on 81st Street for men who were working on the railroads and building the bridges and bulkheads and whatnot. And his mom would drive up from Virginia to visit her sister. They were very close. And she would bring all the 12 children. And I think they just took a liking to the town, and they found work here as well.
Much of the early history here is still uncovered because the white newspapers didn't write about black events, and the original workers were too busy to write down their stories. Also, while nearby Whitesboro was a planned community, 81st grew up gradually with little fanfare. An incident in the Stone Harbor Gazette in 1917 gives a glimpse into the existence of the early community. When Stanford and Jenny Turner gave birth to a baby girl named Edith, Mrs. David Risley gave Edith a golden baby spoon, as she was the first African American baby born in Stone Harbor. From the census, we learned that Stanford was a descendant of enslaved African Americans on 3 sides, but grew up in Cape May County and came to Stone Harbor for the work and to raise his children. In the 1940 census, we can see that he owned his own home and he made $550 a year working at the lumber company. Hard work was at the heart of the miracle and was the first value taught to the children. Most of the men of that first generation were laborers who worked a full day and then did odd jobs after hours. The women were domestics, working as cooks, taking in wash, and raising children. The second generation picked up on the belief in hard work and had their own jobs as young teens.
The Dory and the Moore children, that's what they used to call us. They called me Dory, and they had 4 girls, and I used to keep. But they would everywhere I'd go, they'd go. I had some of them in the coach. And that's how I met the Ludlam boy, because they lived next door, and he taught us how to swim. But I had the kids. I had those kids from the time I started when I was 14. I would come home from school, and the school bus would let me off at 92nd Street. I wouldn't go home because I'd, go watch them while the mother went did whatever. But
Did you take them to the beach?
Oh yeah, take them to the beach.
Which beach?
Their beach, the end
Okay.
of the street.
And that was no problem.
No. Everybody knew us.
Okay.
As I say, Dory and the Moore children.
Right.
Well, he worked his 40-hour-a-week job, 44-hour-a-week, because they worked a half a day on Saturday. Okay? And then during the week, they had enough lawns that where you come home, eat, load up the lawnmowers and stuff like that, off to cutting grass or weeding somebody's garden or whatever, and did all that mess. And then like on Saturdays, they had a big wood stove in the house. And a lot of times you catch the people out of Belle Plaine, they were trying to thin out the forest, and you pay them $5 and go over and get a truckload of wood.
Free.
And believe me, for that $5, we had that truck, them springs was hollering.
I actually worked in Stone Harbor at a young age on a huckster truck. And if you don't know what a huckster truck is, it's a panel truck that was loaded up with fruits and vegetables, and we went door to door, knocking on doors and selling fruit and vegetables. I walked from 81st Street to 114th Street, from the beach to the bay, knocking on every door and running from dogs and and whatnot.
Oh, well, I used to see him coming on this truck, and I told my mom, I said, one day I'm going to marry him, and she said, and I did.
Yeah, it was.
50 years.
Yeah.
Racism was a reality for African Americans in Stone Harbor. When the movie Birth of a Nation fanned the flames of racism, there was a rise of Klan activity on the island. In 1928, the Women's Civic Club put out a list of events on the boardwalk, including a baby parade one day and a Ku Klux Klan gathering the next day. For years, African Americans were welcome to go to the Park movie theater, but had to sit in the rear section, similar to the Jim Crow policies of the Deep South.
Movie theater is terrible. They had a little corner in Stone Harbor where they wanted you to sit for blacks. I went to the movies one night with Al Garrison, Joe DeRose, Matt Vasir, and they said, come on, we're going to go down and sit in the center. That's what we did. We went down and sat in the center of the thing. The guy says, you have to move. And we said, no, we're going to watch the movie here. And that was it. We broke the rules, but I was with someone. I wasn't there by myself sitting in that section.
It was the only time that I remember feeling like displaced was in high school when we went on our senior class trip. We got on a bus at Cape May Courthouse and went to Washington. And when we got to Washington, we were there for 3 days, 3 nights. And our teacher, Miss Black, came to us and told us that she came to us and said that we all could not stay in the same hotel because at that time things were segregated. So Howard University took the 2 boys, and they stayed there. The 8 girls went to this lady's house. This lady, I don't remember her name, but she had a daughter that was graduating high school also, and she invited us to stay at her house, all 8 girls. Some of the girls got upset about, being displaced and whatnot, but didn't bother me. It really didn't bother me. I remember not being bothered, but she gave us nice rooming quarters, and her daughter. There were places that the white children could go for recreation that we could not go. So the lady where we stayed took all 10 of us to places where the black children went.
There may have been some segregation. I'm not saying there wasn't now, because during that time there was segregation all around.
Yeah.
So, but I was treated by the students themselves as a friend, and we got along well.
Just neatly all the time. There was a boy whose name was Herbie Vanderpool. Decided to, because James had roller skates, pushed him down on the ground and he tore his shirt. And he got up and naturally waffled this kid. And it wasn't a black-white thing. It was the fact that this kid had made him tear his shirt. They took him into Mrs. Carr. And when, I think you mentioned about the prejudice, took them, both of them in. And at the time, my cousin was still very upset because his shirt was torn. And he knew he was going to get scolded for that when he got home. And set Herbie Vanderpool on one side and my cousin James on the other side. Okay, kids, what happened? And she called some of the kids and corroborated in terms of what had happened, how this thing ensued. And the kids said it was Herbie Vanderpool's fault because James was on his roller skates minding his business and he pushed him down. And she said, James, you don't have to be upset. She said, Herbie, I'm going to get in touch with your parents. And the fact that he was Caucasian didn't make any difference. And she did.
By that time, there was no prejudice. There was no.
Oh no, there was still prejudice. I mean, but the people weren't outward with it. You know what I mean? You respect me, I respect you. I'll keep my views to myself. You know, and so really, you didn't know who was who because you didn't know the real deal.
My long-term goal after I worked there and I left was to go back as a guest. That happened, but my husband and I, we was, hey, come down here, because we lived in Philly, come down here for a cotillion. And I told him, I want to stay at Schiller Haven. And I want the room on the bay, and I want the whole works. I want the kitchenette and the whole, we wasn't cooking or nothing, but I wanted that, right? And it had to be on the bay. So, in the wintertime, there's nobody there. But they leave your key on the desk. So, and they'll tell you, when you come in, pick up your key. So, we picked up the key and went to our room, and it was the same room I had always, envisioned. And we were there for 3 days or something like that. But we never saw anybody. And the day we checked out, he says, the guy says, can I help you? And I said, yes, I'm returning my key and we're checking out. He says, you're a what? So they had no idea who they had rented the room to. And that was such a thrill for me because I had got to do what I had always wanted to do after working there. It made me feel so good that I could pull it off, and they never knew, but there was still prejudice there. Because if there hadn't been, he wouldn't have asked me, you was where? That's some part of Stone Harbor, not all. Mm-hmm. Some, like I think I told you about Henny's. They would serve you. No, I'll take that back. If you ordered something from Henny's, you could go to the back door and pick up whatever it is you ordered. Whatever you want, you could get. But you did not go in. And that was an unspoken rule. I don't know where that came from.
We just had the.
Tell me about building your house on 81st.
Oh, Mr. Leskers was the one cause of us to get it. He said she can't stay in that little coop that she stay in. I had 3 boys. So he went to Sturdy Loan and signed for me to get it. And his name Clarence Leskers, they called him Dutch. And we got along fine. And then my sister-in-law, she worked for his wife, Ms. Leskers. Because, see, some of the people there, they didn't want to work, they steal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't steal. Anything I want to ask you for.
How did you afford the house?
I worked 2 jobs.
And your husband was working
He
one
was
job,
working,
2
yeah,
jobs.
Yeah, we worked and we cut grass. I helped him to cut. I don't know how to edge. And then we'd cut the grass and all that. And that's how we paid for it. Never missed a payment.
He was also
coming from offshore into Stone Harbor. As long as we stayed on 96th Street, between the bowling alley and the courts. Once we left the courts and started walking, usually the cops would want to stop you and see who you were. And then once they got to know who you were, it was okay. You know, if we came to the beach, most of the time we went down to 81st Street Beach. You could get there without getting a ticket.
I still have great friends from Stone Harbor. I go over there all the time. And guys that I grew up with, Tom Tice, Rick Olson, Joey Donahue. These are guys, Tripper Hendy. And these are guys that I've known since kindergarten. And we are still the best of friends. And I love it. And I love, being growing up in Stone Harbor with these guys.
The second largest factor in the miracle was Stone Harbor Public School number 1. While there was some racism in the town, there seems to have been none in this high-achieving school. When the modern 4-room school was built in 1914 at a cost of $12,000, the total population of the town was under 200 people, so the classes were never crowded in the early days. Even though the school was small, the teachers were excellent and individual attention was the norm.
Like I said, it was only 8 in my class. I'm going to my graduation in 7th and 8th grade, so we'd have 8 in mine and maybe 8 to 10 in the 7th grade, and it was half the class was facing one side with a blackboard, and the other half was facing the other side with a blackboard, and the teacher had to teach. They taught everything: social studies, English, math, everything was taught by these teachers. So it was great hands-on.
I had the best of education. I can't complain because they did not, say, well, no, you can't learn because you're black. I got just what everybody else got.
And we weren't, unlike now, there were different levels of learners. There were slow people and there were the AP people. We didn't have all that in Stone Harbor. We were all children, we were all bright, we were all learners, we were all equal.
And I actually enjoyed school, even though I daydreamed a lot in Stone Harbor Public School number 1 because I could hear the seagulls at the beach, and I wanted to be at the beach. I got in a lot of trouble for that. But anyway, my first teacher was Mrs. Carr. She was the principal, a little short Caucasian lady. She did not care whether you were black, white, polka dot, purple, or green. You were the totem mark in the classroom. And when you got in trouble, you ran into Mrs. Carr. You did your work in the classroom. If it was to be corrected, she corrected it and gave it back to you, but she took her time and went over individually. We might have had maybe 15 students in the room. Anyone that decided to try to misbehave and it was not good for your character if you did, they did not succeed very well because you knew darn well you're going to run into Mrs. Carr.
I remember in 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that Monday when we went to school, we had never heard of Pearl Harbor. Only harbors we knew was Stone Harbor and Egg Harbor. It was Egg Harbor, New Jersey. And we couldn't figure out where Pearl Harbor was. And we thought it was Egg Harbor. So anyhow, Mr. Fleming, our teacher, brought all the students in the gym and a map and showed us where Pearl Harbor was. And then we knew that it wasn't Egg Harbor. But at that time, it was in 1941, we knew about, I was 10 years old. We understood, not really, about war. But as time went on, when, you know, some of the boys in our neighborhood started going to war. And I remember one, Stevie Ludlam, that's the one I remember that went to, you know, and James McCargo, the older McCargo boy. I remember James McCargo was in the Marines, and he came home with his uniform on, and we thought that was the greatest thing. He marched up and down 81st Street with his uniform. We thought that was the greatest thing since Christmas.
I mean, they were, as far as I know, they were just teachers, you know. But you didn't give them no lip either, because everybody had your parents' phone number. You know what I mean? So by the time
when the men took the
hold on, Mom. By the time, if you did something bad in school, but she'd be standing waiting for you at the door.
But the story is that, and it's a well-known story and oft-told story, that she was a domestic, and she said, I think she had 7 children, she said, all of my children will be educated. That is my responsibility. They are going to become educated, they're going to leave here, and they're going to see the world, and they're going to do great things.
They did. They made sure that all of us went off to college. And they did this on, Mother did housework and did laundry. And Dad did laboring, but he was laboring, that's all they did. And they made it so we could go to college, but most of us were on scholarship.
The Roberson family won national fame when Stone Harbor native Dick DeGrouchy featured the entire family in the May 1948 issue of True Sport Picture Stories. In just 6 pages, DeGrouchy sketches a 20-year portrait of the very determined Roberson family who worked through the Depression and served heroically in World War II and Korea. Sports and academics were strongly encouraged, and all went on to good colleges and careers. Hattie in the medical field, Chris Jr. in leukemia and teaching. James became a doctor. Charlotte became a teacher and a principal. The youngest, John, was a football player at Indiana after serving in the Korean War and came back to teach for 33 years at his old high school. Ask any Stone Harbor native from that era, and they will tell you what a great presence Big John Roberson was. He exemplified the best of a wonderful family.
I got my BS degree in 56, got my master's in 57. I wanted to be where I could work with children that help form their lives. So that's what I did. So I came back here, got a job here at Middle Township where I went to high school and taught there for 33 years. You know, some of the teachers complained that they had problems. I never had one problem in all my years of teaching in middle with a student. I found out if you respect a student, they will respect you.
It was somewhat of a traumatic experience for me during my school days. By being the only black at that time in school, I really can't say I was shunned, but nobody paid any attention to me. It was like, you know, I wasn't even there. I had no true friends that I could say was really friendly with me. I had acquaintances. It was a difficult time. Then it was like a reverse thing. When I got to Middle Township, there were a lot of black people there that I was excited to see because while in Stone Harbor, there was none. And when I got there to Middle Township, it was like, they don't want anything to do with me because I'm different. I'm black just like they are, but I'm different because I grew up in Stone Harbor, and that was a stigma. Anybody from Stone Harbor, you know, was like better than they are, but that was not true. I had no choice of where I grew up. But
Mrs. Loveland. It's interesting she had a name like that. I thought she hated me. And I'll tell you why. There was a particular young lady in the class. Someone either hit her or something. She said, I did that. But it was another kid that did. And I hated being blamed for something I didn't do. Meantime, Mrs. Loveland kept me in for recess. Okay? And I hadn't really done anything. And I told her that. And she kept me in for recess for like, I guess, 2 weeks.
You're 8 years old?
I was maybe 9 then, yeah. But she kept me in for recess, and I hadn't really done anything. Later on, she told me she kept me in because she wanted me to learn fractions. It wasn't because this lie had been told on me. She said, I wanted you to learn fractions, and I knew you were having problems with fractions, so therefore I kept you in. And by the time I got back out to recess, I knew how to reduce fractions. I knew how to do mixed fractions. I knew how to change fractions to decimals. I knew the whole thing. And later on, she found out that I had started teaching, and she told me that. That's the reason she kept me in. So to me, that was a mark of a good teacher. Yeah. And like I said, I thought she hated me, and she didn't. Mm-hmm. She told me, she said, the reason I kept you in, William, because I knew you had promise.
Do you have a favorite teacher?
Miss McCormick. She was my favorite, I think. I was very close to her. Very close to her. She taught 3rd or 4th grade, something like that. But I was very close to her. Catherine McCormick. Yeah. She was, I remember her rightly.
The small Bethel Union American Methodist Episcopal Church was there from almost the beginning, having been founded in 1917. It became one of the pillars of the community, serving as a community center as well as a house of worship. The congregation was never large enough to have a full-time minister. Ministers would come down to the shore from places as far away as Camden. The church was a community project, and the Sunday school classes were run by different women from 81st Street.
We all had a little church, and we had a pastor that came on Sundays, and my grandmother was in charge of the business part of the church, and my grandfather took care of the heat and made sure the church was clean and things like that. We had a nice Sunday school. Miss Annie Wright was our Sunday school teacher. I was part of the Wright family, Wright Johnson family, and all the children had to come to Sunday school.
Starting with Bethel UAMA Church, I didn't even know what the letter stood for at first. Later on, we had to learn that. We went to that church. We learned the books of the Bible. We learned the 10 Commandments. We learned Christmas songs and I love to sing. I still sing. Related to the Bible, like Away in the Manger and different songs like that. We learned about respect for people, learned what true love was, looking out for your fellow man and all that kind of thing. We learned that you sat still in church and you didn't play around, you know. It was just so much. But she was so patient, you know, and she was so, Miss Sarah Lewis, she was just so patient.
I learned to read at Bethel UME Church, our church on 81st Street. Before I went to school, I was reading. My great aunt insisted that we learn how to read the hymns in the lyrics in the hymnals. We went to Bible school before I went to public school, so I was reading then. And like I said, both of my parents were avid readers. So I grew up in the library. In a lot of ways, I was a weird child in that way. The library was my second home, and my mom encouraged that.
Did you go to church?
Did I go to church? You better had if I wouldn't be sitting there talking to you. I was baptized in the Rappahannock River.
Were you involved with the church? Did you?
Sure, I used to go there cut the grass and help them. I did when we didn't, in the wintertime, they closed up the church because they didn't have no heating there.
Right.
The life on 81st Street spilled over onto 3rd Avenue and a bit onto 82nd Street and 80th Street, an area that was not much larger than a football field. It could be quiet in the winter months, but in the summer, city cousins came to visit and the street filled with the sounds of kids playing. Not only did everyone know one another, there were many marriages in that second generation that meant people were united by location, but also by blood.
And then the Wrights that lived across. McCargos always played together. They played in the street. We skated in the street. We learned to ride bicycles in the street because there wasn't any traffic. We had an old beat-up car, and a couple other people had cars, but there wasn't traffic like there is today. My best friend was a little white girl that lived behind us, the Reicherts. They lived directly behind us.
Right. In the summer, there was a whole lot more.
And what kind of games did you play?
We played 1, 2, 3 red light. We played hide and seek. We played hopscotch. Even the boys, yeah, we played hopscotch too. Let's see. We had scavenger hunts. Okay. Jump rope. You know, later on I found out jump rope was a masculine skill too because Muhammad Ali, one of our greatest athletes, that's what he did to train, you know. And I went to the store. I was the store delivery guy. Okay, Bud Zucato's store. I don't know if you remember that or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, he and my Uncle Elwood were born and had the same birthday, March 1st, and they were good friends. So whenever they had to get groceries or whatever, they gave me a list and no money. I couldn't understand that. And I went around to the store and he would give me the pork chops and detergent and whatever else went on that list. And I'd say, well, how much did it cost? They'd say, you don't have to be concerned about that. But at the week, they didn't have any credit cards in. At the end of the week, my uncles went by and paid for those groceries or whatever. And we always had plenty of food. Okay?
The beach wasn't my thing.
No.
Why? I got a tan, and then it don't fade in October. Okay?
Okay.
You know, so I mean, we'd like to go to the beach. She'd come home from work and say, blah, 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 blah. You got 45 minutes. Hit it. So I could run from the house to the beach in about 2.5 seconds because you wanted to spend as much time as you could there. Come on back. Take a shower.
It was called the Working Men's Bungalow because it was originally built for workers on the island when it was young to stay in, and naturally she fixed their meals for them and whatever because she knew how to take, I guess, a little bit of food and make a pot, which we found out about because from elementary school we walked home, ate lunch, and then walked back to school. And that was from 81st Street to 93rd Street, which is right around the corner here. That's right. Every day. When we came home, we had a hot meal. But we always had fresh milk. She had 1 quart of buttermilk. That was hers. You better not touch that. For whatever she used it for, cooking or whatever. And he left that. And from that, she made bread puddings. Oh, God, I guess that's why I'm gaining so much weight. She made bread pudding, she made blueberry cobbler, she made peach cobbler. she made not sweet potato pie, but sweet potato puffs, where she took the sweet potato mix and put it inside of a triangular shaped piece of dough and pinned it at the corners and took a fork and scored it. And those were the desserts we ate. She had crullers. They were donuts. Some had white icing on them. Some had no icing on them. And she'd take them and put it in her coffee cup with coffee, just like I have some now, because I drink my coffee, with a lot of cream in it and sugar. And she would dunk those donuts in the coffee and eat those donuts. I would sit and stare in her face so long at maybe 10 years old. Finally, she said, "Here, boy," and give it. I knew she was going to do it to get tired of me looking at her. But always plenty of food.
So let me tell you about coming home from church on a Sunday afternoon. It was only a 2-minute walk, but it would take me almost 2 hours. I would stop first at Aunt Sarah's house to see Uncle Lou and Aunt Sarah. And while I would visit them, she would bake pies, fried chicken, because a lot of times the ministers would come to her house for dinner after church. So, and she always had Hershey bars, my favorite. So she'd ask me if I wanted some pie, and I would say no thank you, but of course I couldn't resist chocolate. So I'd take my Hershey bar, and then I said, I have to go home because we're going to have dinner. So as I make my way down, I would see the Mrs. Romney who was next door, and she would say hello. And she'd say, "Come inside. I made spaghetti. Would you like to have some?" I said, "No, thank you. I have to go home. My parents are coming. We're going to have dinner this afternoon." She's like, "Just have a little bit." And at the time, I would because her grandson Kevin was there, and we would be playing together. So I'd have a little bit, and then I make my way down the street. Then I see Uncle Elwood in the yard. He's like, "Missy, I'm frying chicken. You want a piece of chicken?" And I'd be like, "No, thank you. I'm going to have dinner at my grandparents' house." And he'd say, "Just one chicken leg." And I say, "Okay." And then I'd have a chicken leg, and then I'd go home. And then I get home, and dinner was ready. And my parents would say, "Why aren't you hungry?" And I say, "I had a Hershey bar, I had spaghetti, and I had fried chicken." And they would just laugh because they knew that, everyone wanted to entertain me and I would entertain them. So it was a time of fellowship, and that was a way of showing love. And it was great times on 81st Street in Stone Harbor as a child.
Christmas was always a big time for us. My father would go chop the tree down up in the woods, make sure the tree was, and all families did the same thing. Had to put the tree up on Christmas Eve and decorate it, all the neighbors and everything. And then we had the volunteer fire company there in Stone Harbor gave every child a gift. And they came on Christmas Eve in a fire truck around to everybody's house and gave them gifts for Christmas. It was great growing up. Great growing up. I enjoyed it. And I look back on our growing up. We had a good time growing up. Good time.
We called her Aunt Jane.
Okay.
Yeah. And she raised me until I was like 11 years old, until my Uncle built his house. And that house, describing the inside of it, it had a huge dining room. Then there were a lot of books that I had never seen before, and I was always an avid reader. I'm talking about Ivanhoe, I'm talking about Shakespeare, I'm talking about Shelley, I'm talking about Keats, I'm talking about the Roman Empire, I'm talking about Don Quixote. I had never seen these words before. I could always read. And I asked her, could I read those books, because they belonged to her daughter. She went to a school in Virginia that was called the R.I. Academy, and that was like the equivalent of Yale to black people down there. You got a really good education. So those books came from there, and she let me read them, actually.
So I say until I was 12 or 13, I never had a brand new bicycle. So it was one of them birthdays I got a brand new bicycle. I mean, I could travel from Maine to Spain, Nebraska to Alaska. If I could get away with it for a minute, I was gone.
My hero, I believe, growing up was Joe Louis. And whenever he was fighting, everybody got in the living room around the radio. And my grandfather had us all sitting there quiet, and we were like leaning with every punch. When Joe Louis fought Max Schmeling, I think I remember rightly, we just gloried in that. Then after it was all over and he won, everybody got in the street and jumped up and down and everything.
Carstairs Hotel?
Carstairs Hotel was sort of like a black social club. The kids weren't allowed to go over there. But the grown-ups on a Friday night would get dressed to the nines. I'm talking about shirts, ties, shine shoes, etc. The ladies had their cocktail dresses and so on and so forth. They would get dressed and go over to Carstairs. That was a big thing for them. They had the jukebox, which I gave you a picture of. And Miss Lucy, who was a very elegant lady, she was the owner of that. And the upstairs, the furniture was elegant. As I said, they dressed like they were going to, what would you call, one of those fancy places,
Nightclub?
Pub Tiki, a nightclub or something. And they knew that. You didn't go over there in jeans and so on and so forth. If I went to the door like this, I wouldn't have been let in. Simple as that. They danced, they had a good time. And as far as I know, Mr. Aiken, who was the police chief, never had to come up there. Right? Because it was known when you came there, you knew how to act. See, so that people did not know that about our culture.
Did they have musicians or
You
singers?
had a jukebox. You could put it there, but she didn't have nothing else. You put your own nickel, dimes, or quarters, whatever it was, and then go over there and dance. And they'd drink a little beer, which I didn't drink beer. And that was it.
Were you a dancer?
Yeah, I could dance.
Good?
All of us could dance.
The very heart of the Miracle on 81st Street grew from the core values passed on by that first generation to their children. Never rich in coin, they passed on a respect for hard work, honesty, family, and love.
He made sure I had responsibilities. I had things to do every day, such as I had to chop wood for the old house and so on and so forth. He made sure I went to church. He made sure that I knew values like honesty, hard work, family, loyalty, being an integral part of a family with a responsibility, not just being there so someone would be there for me.
Today. But I think they felt very safe in town. There was work here for them. And I think they had the same values as the people who lived here had. Hard work ethic, you raise your families, you educate your children, you advocate for their well-being. That was your responsibility as parents. And I would say that all of the Anderson children who came here and settled here held those values and demonstrated those values throughout their lives here. And fundamentally, I think they felt very safe here.
And when they tell me things, I didn't steal, I didn't lie, and anything you want to know, I tell you.
Okay.
These people nowadays, that's why the kids don't do no better. It's not no juvenile kids, it's juvenile parents.
Okay, what were some of your rules?
What don't belong to you, don't touch it. Like he said, he work, if you want something, ask for it. If you're hungry, you ask for it.
At the end of the week, on the street, on 81st Street, everyone raised you. I told you about Mr. Robert Pryor, who knew the entire sewer system. He knew where the manholes were. He knew if there was a problem with the plumbing in the town or something. He knew where it was, and he would go down in those manholes and supervise repairing it or repair it himself. Okay? Describing him, he was a black man with a bald head, and he had a handlebar mustache, which I always wanted one, could never grow it. Okay? He was about 5'8". He was bow-legged and had arms like tree trunks. Okay, because he worked in the coal mines and worked on the railroad and all those hard jobs and whatever. And he would see you on the street, maybe you would say something wrong or you would hit somebody or something like that. I'm going to tell Miss Talifair. And he said, come here, come here. He said, I'm going to cut your ear off. He didn't say ear. I'm going to cut your ear off. And he had a hook knife, a knife with a hook on it, come here. And he'd grab you by your shoulder and oh, Mr. Pryor, I'm not going to do it anymore, you know. And I'm going to tell Miss Tolliver I'm going to cut your ear off. And he would run his hand along your ear like he was cutting it off, and we'd be screaming and jumping up and down. It was so funny. He never hurt us. But we behaved because we didn't want to be Mr. Pryor to, you know, correct us. So he was that type. Mr. Jim McCargo, he would clear his voice. He had asthma. He would clear his throat and scare you to death. You know, and then he said, son, I saw you do such and such. I'm going to tell Miss Tolliver. So, like I said, the whole block raised us. Okay, and that's where it was. And you knew that you better not get too far out of turn because you had to pay for that later on. And it would get back to the house with no telephones. So that's the way I was raised.
Well, the community in whole was, it was like having 4 or 5 moms, because everybody looked out for everybody else, you know, and if you did something bad, maybe your aunt would be the first house you got to. And if that was the first house you got to, you got a licking or a good talking to, and then it proceeded until you got home. So it was like everybody was your mom at one time or another. It was kind of neat. And then Aunt Janie, I think I talked to you about her. Her last name was Talifero. And she used to make you go out if it was bad. And at her house, she would make you go out and get a switch. And she could tell you what tree to go get it on.
From the bayberry bushes?
Yeah. That thing, when you went whap, that thing went all the way around the corners and stuff. It was really, she would make you go out and get your switch. And then she would tie you up there, man. You know, she'd beat your butt. And then you go home and you get another one because, you know, it went right on down the line, you know.
First thing I think of is the sound of the seagulls in the evening as the sun goes down. I think of smelling the salt air at night, being able to leave your window up at night and not worry about anyone climbing through and harming you. Let's see, what else about Stone Harbor? I thought about the fishing, the best fishing in the world. You know, I thought about the, let's see, the fact that you were free to go out and roam all through those sand dunes, play around the houses up there, nobody bothered you. I thought about the fact that you respected older people. You better respect them, because if you didn't, you had to suffer the consequences. And you respected yourself. You respected your surroundings. All of that.
We had good growing up, though. We had good growing up. We had good parents. Everybody tried to raise the children the best they could. I never had a door key because we didn't lock the door. I never had a door key till I moved to Philadelphia. And then when I moved to Philadelphia, I had to have a door key. I kept losing them and everything. But we didn't have a door key. But we had good times. We had good times. We'd dress up for Halloween. And good food for Thanksgiving, and we were, as I say, we were poor, but they didn't, you know, I guess we didn't know it, because there's a lot of things we had, and we were one of the first families to have a television, one of the first families to have a phone. But I think my mother and my grandparents, they hid things from us, I guess, so that we would be happy. If I could get my mother and grandmother and all of them back, I'd sit them here and cook a big meal for them, like they cooked for us. Wow. Yeah. I think that Stone Harbor is the greatest place in the world when I was growing up.
For over 80 years, the miracle held until it was blown away by a rising tide of money. The old died off and the young moved away, selling the family home to buy a bigger home in New York, Philly, or courthouse. 4 of the houses are still owned by the people who grew up in Stone Harbor, but the full-time community is gone. Today, the gulls still call and the surf still rolls, but the miracle drifted away. $1-million homes sit on the quiet street that was once so alive. The old ones, the founders, wouldn't recognize the street. The small frame houses are not there. The church is gone. Aunt Jane is gone. The Robersons are gone. The Andersons were the last to leave. But for nearly 100 years, they lived a miracle. On a street where the doors were left unlocked, food was on the table, and the sound of children playing filled the endless summer days. Only the memory lingers of a street filled with joy and strong people who created their own small miracle.